Tonight, we unravel three chilling stories about people who came face to face with something not quite human. From a man with a reversed face to a coworker who defies explanation, and an elderly woman whose appearance sends chills down the spine. These tales will make you question who or what walks among us. What would you do if your instincts screamed to run? Stay tuned as we delve into these unsettling accounts. Welcome to Echoes in the Dark. Henry McAllister had been a truck driver for over 20 years. Night hauls between states were second nature to him, and he'd grown accustomed to the eerie loneliness of dark highways. But one foggy night on a stretch of road in the Midwest, something happened that still haunts him to this day. It was nearing 2 a.m. when Henry spotted a car pulled over on the shoulder ahead. Its hazard lights blinked erratically, like a heartbeat out of sync. Instinctively, Henry slowed his truck and moved to the side of the road. As he approached, he noticed a figure standing near the vehicle waving frantically. Henry rolled down his window and the man, dressed in a torn jacket and jeans, approached. Something about the man seemed off. His movements were jerky, almost mechanical, and his voice was strangely monotone when he spoke. "Help me, please. My car crashed," he said, gesturing to the vehicle. The thing is, the car didn't look right. Its shape was oddly distorted, as if someone had tried to recreate a sedan from memory but got the proportions all wrong. But what truly sent shivers through Henry's body was the man's face. At first glance, it seemed normal. But as Henry's eyes adjusted to the dim light, he noticed the man's features didn't align properly. His mouth stretched unnaturally wide. His eyes were slightly too far apart, and then Henry realized the man's face was flipped. His nose pointed downward toward his neck, and his mouth opened upside down. Henry's pulse raced as an overwhelming sense of dread washed over him. The man moved closer, reaching for the door handle. That's when Henry's instincts kicked in. Slamming the truck into gear, he floored the gas pedal, speeding away from the grotesque figure. In his rearview mirror, he saw the man standing in the middle of the road, staring after him. But as Henry glanced back a second time, the figure was gone, and so was the car. For the rest of the night, Henry couldn't shake the feeling that something had been watching him from the shadows of the highway. For months, Simon worked in an unremarkable office building in downtown Chicago. He'd always considered his co-workers friendly but forgettable, a revolving door of faces, names, and small talk. But there was one colleague who stood out in the strangest way. Simon first noticed him during a team meeting. The man didn't say much, but his presence was unsettling. He always seemed to be there, lingering in hallways or seated in rooms where he hadn't entered. No one ever mentioned him, but when Simon asked a coworker, they nodded as if it were the most normal thing in the world. "Yeah, I've seen him around. He's in some other department, I think," they'd say. But no one could recall his name. The man, Simon began calling him the Phantom in his mind, had a peculiar habit of showing up in restricted areas of the building. One afternoon, Simon watched him enter the executive suite, which required a special key card. But when Simon asked about it, the receptionist shrugged. "There's no one here by that description," she said. Then came the holiday party. The office gathered for group photos, and the Phantom appeared in the background of several shots. But when Simon reviewed the photos the next day, the man's face was blurred beyond recognition. Everyone else was perfectly in focus, yet the Phantom looked like a smudge on the lens. Things escalated one evening when Simon stayed late to finish a report. As he worked, he heard footsteps behind him, slow and deliberate. Turning, he saw the Phantom standing just beyond the cubicles, watching him. "What are you doing here?" Simon demanded, his voice trembling. The Phantom tilted his head almost as if amused, then turned and walked away. Except he didn't use the door. Simon watched in disbelief as the man vanished into the dimly lit hallway, his figure dissolving like smoke. The next day, Simon tried to ask his manager about the phantom. "Who?" the manager asked, looking genuinely confused. And yet, everyone else had vague memories of him, as though he were some fleeting presence lingering on the edge of their reality. Simon eventually quit the job, but he kept the photos. To this day, the phantom's blurred face haunts him, and sometimes, in the quiet moments of the night, Simon wonders if the phantom still watches him from afar. Jake had always trusted his instincts. He wasn't superstitious or prone to paranoia, but he believed that gut feelings existed for a reason. And one fateful night at a rural gas station, that belief may have saved his life. It was just past midnight and Jake was on his way home from a weekend camping trip. His truck was running low on fuel, so he pulled into a quiet gas station on the outskirts of town. The place was dimly lit, with only a single attendant inside and no other cars in sight, except for an old sedan parked on the far edge of the lot, shrouded in shadows where the station's lights didn't quite reach. As Jake filled his tank, he noticed movement near the sedan. A woman stepped out and began walking toward him. At first, he thought she might need directions or assistance. She was hunched over, moving slowly, and her frail frame suggested she was well into her 80s. But as she got closer, something about her seemed off. Her face didn't match her body. Her skin was flawless, smooth, radiant, and without a single wrinkle. Her teeth were perfectly straight and gleamed unnaturally white when she spoke. Yet her voice was raspy, gravelly, and unmistakably that of an elderly woman. "Excuse me, young man," she said, her tone sweet yet unsettling. "Could you help me? I seem to have misplaced my handbag and I think it's in the trunk of my car." Jake hesitated, glancing toward her car. It was parked at the very edge of the station, almost swallowed by darkness. There were no other cars nearby, and the area gave him an uneasy feeling. But she seemed harmless, frail even. He decided to help. "Sure, ma'am," he replied, forcing a polite smile. He followed her toward the car, his boots crunching softly against the gravel. But as they walked, an overwhelming sense of danger began to creep over him. It wasn't anything she said or did. It was something he couldn't explain. Her presence felt wrong, like standing too close to the edge of a cliff. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up, and his heart began to race. By the time they were halfway to her car, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that he shouldn't be there. The darkness seemed thicker around her vehicle, almost unnatural, and his instincts screamed at him to leave. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I just remembered I have to get going," he said abruptly, taking a step back. The woman stopped and turned to face him. Her smile widened unnaturally, stretching too far across her youthful face. "Oh, but it'll only take a moment," she said, her raspy voice now dripping with something that felt like menace. Jake's pulse spiked. Without another word, he turned and bolted back to his truck, slamming the door shut and locking it in one swift motion. As he fumbled to start the engine, he glanced back toward the woman. She was no longer hunched over. She stood unnaturally tall, her thin frame almost skeletal. She wasn't moving, just watching him. And then she smiled again, a wide, predatory grin that sent shivers down his spine. Jake floored the gas pedal, speeding away from the station as fast as his truck could go. When he looked in the rearview mirror, she was standing by her car, motionless, still smiling. For weeks after the encounter, Jake couldn't stop replaying the incident in his mind. Who, or what, had he encountered that night? And why had his instincts been so adamant to get away? He never found answers, but he never stopped at that gas station again. These three encounters remind us of one universal truth. Our instincts often know what our minds cannot comprehend. Whether it's a man with a distorted face, a coworker who defies explanation, or a woman whose presence feels like a warning, these stories challenge the boundaries of what we consider human and what lies beyond. Could these figures be interdimensional beings, entities observing us from parallel realities, or something far more sinister? The uncanny details, the inverted face, the blurred presence in photos, and the unnatural mix of youth and age suggest beings that mimic humanity but fall just short of blending in. Perhaps these beings thrive on the thin line between fear and curiosity, drawn to places where they can exploit our desire to help or our need to understand the unknown. What would you do if faced with one of these encounters? Would you trust your instincts, or would curiosity lead you further into the unknown? Share your thoughts and your own experiences in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more tales that will leave you questioning the reality you think you know. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.